Reality is not responding to what you want right now. It is responding to the way you are showing up, not your plans, not your effort, not your intentions, but the internal posture you carry beneath all of that. And if things have felt strangely paused, muted, or suspended lately, it's not because nothing is happening, it's because the signal you're transmitting has changed, and reality is waiting to confirm which version of you has actually arrived. Most people assume that when progress slows, they need to push harder or think more clearly, but what actually changes first is far subtler. It's the way you occupy yourself internally when nothing is demanding your attention. It's the tone beneath your thoughts, the emotional weight you carry without noticing, the way your body expects the world to respond before anything even happens. These are not abstract qualities. They are the primary information reality reads. If you pause for a moment, you may notice that the way you've been showing up recently doesn't match the way you used to. You might still be moving through the same routines, speaking the same words, pursuing similar goals, but the orientation is different. There's less urgency, less internal persuasion, less willingness to convince yourself that something is working when it isn't. That shift doesn't announce itself loudly, but it changes the signal completely. This is why effort has started to feel inefficient. Not wrong, just misaligned. When the internal posture changes, old strategies stop producing results, not as punishment, but as feedback. Reality isn't blocking you, it's checking for coherence. It's listening for consistency between what you feel, what you expect, and how you're actually inhabiting your choices. And until that coherence stabilizes, the mirror stays still. You may have noticed a kind of quiet tension underneath this pause. Not anxiety exactly, more like a subtle awareness that something is pending. That awareness is not impatience, it's sensitivity. It means your system has become refined enough to detect the moment before response. Most people rush past this stage because it doesn't feel productive. But this is where the field begins to reorganize. What matters here is not what you're trying to make happen, but how you are standing while you wait. Are you braced for disappointment? Are you rehearsing explanations in advance? Are you holding expectation with pressure or with neutrality? These internal positions aren't conscious decisions, but they shape the signal more powerfully than intention ever could. And once you start noticing them, you realize they've already been changing. You might feel less compelled to narrate your process, less interested in forcing certainty, more willing to sit inside not knowing without rushing to resolve it. That's not disengagement, it's stabilization. When the nervous system stops scanning for threat or validation, it broadcasts a cleaner state. And reality responds to clean signals faster than it responds to loud ones. This is the part that often confuses people. The pause doesn't mean you've stalled. It means the version of you that used to push no longer fits the signal you're transmitting. Something in you has already shifted from striving to presence, from anticipation to arrival. And reality doesn't mirror transitions mid-motion. It waits until the new posture holds. That waiting can feel uncomfortable because it removes familiar feedback loops. There's nothing to fix, nothing to chase, nothing to optimize, just a growing awareness of how you show up when nothing is being asked of you. And that awareness is not passive, it's formative. The moment you become conscious of your internal posture, the response window opens. You don't need to adjust anything yet. You don't need to decide what this means. The only thing that matters right now is recognition, because once you recognize that reality is responding to how you show up, not what you want, you stop looking outward for signs and start noticing the signal you're already sending. And that's where the real shift begins. The signal reality responds to is not created by thought. Thought is too slow, too performative, too easily overridden by habit. The signal is generated deeper, in the nervous system, in the body's baseline expectation of safety, permission, and timing. Long before you decide what you want, your system has already decided how much it expects life to meet you. And that expectation is constantly broadcasting. This is why you can say the right words, hold the right ideas, even believe in the right outcomes, and still feel as though nothing is moving. Because beneath all of that, the body may still be braced, vigilant, or subtly negotiating with the future. Reality does not respond to declarations layered on top of tension. It responds to the state that remains when nothing is being managed. If you slow your attention for a moment, you might notice how your body holds itself when you think about the things you want most. There may be a tightening in the chest, a readiness in the shoulders, a subtle leaning forward internally, as if you're preparing to intervene. That posture is not wrong, it's learned. It once kept you moving, protected, motivated, but it also tells reality something very specific, that you are not yet at rest with what is. The nervous system does not lie, it communicates constantly through tone, breath, muscular readiness, and emotional baseline. And unlike the mind, it cannot pretend. This is why reality listens to it first. The field responds to the version of you that is embodied, not the version that is articulated. When the body expects resistance, the mirror provides delay. When the body expects struggle, the mirror reflects complexity, not as punishment, as correspondence. You may be noticing lately that this bodily posture is changing on its own. Less tightening, less preemptive readiness, less urgency to do something when uncertainty appears. This is not passivity, it's a recalibration of trust. When the nervous system begins to release chronic effort, it signals a different relationship to outcome, one that doesn't require constant control to feel safe. That shift can feel unsettling at first. The mind may interpret it as loss of motivation or direction. But what's actually happening is a deeper form of intelligence taking over. The body is learning that it no longer needs to brace in order to survive the future. And when that happens, the signal becomes coherent. Coherence is not emotional positivity, it's internal agreement. It's when your thoughts, expectations, and physical state stop contradicting one another, when you're no longer thinking one thing, feeling another, and preparing for a third. Reality responds quickly to coherence because it doesn't need to sort through noise. The signal is clean. This is also why people often experience a strange quiet before a major shift. Not excitement, not certainty, just stillness. The nervous system has stopped sending mixed messages. It's no longer asking for proof, reassurance, or acceleration. And when that happens, reality pauses, not because it's inactive, but because it's aligning its response. Most people interrupt this stage. They mistake stillness for stagnation and reintroduce effort. They start narrating, forcing, seeking signs. And in doing so, they distort the signal again. You didn't, or at least something in you resisted doing that this time. You allowed the quiet to remain. That choice wasn't conscious. It came from exhaustion with performing readiness, from a subtle refusal to keep convincing yourself that movement must be forced. And that refusal changed the broadcast. Reality felt it immediately. When the body no longer flinches at uncertainty, it sends a powerful message that you are available to receive without negotiation, that you are not bracing for disappointment, that you are not demanding outcome as proof of worth. This is the moment where the field begins to reorganize, not around desire, but around presence. You may notice this showing up in small ways. Conversations feel different. Timing feels less urgent. You're less reactive to delays, less inclined to chase clarity. These are not personality changes, they are signal shifts. And reality responds to these shifts with precision, not drama. It's important to understand this now because the next phase is not about doing anything differently. It's about recognizing that something fundamental has already changed in how you inhabit yourself. The body has stopped asking for permission. The nervous system has stopped scanning for threat. And in that space, a new response becomes possible. This is why the old methods no longer work. Not because they were wrong, but because they belong to a different internal posture. A posture that no longer matches the signal you're transmitting. You are not meant to return to effort from here. You're meant to allow coherence to hold. And when coherence holds long enough, reality doesn't need to be persuaded, it responds. But the way it responds, and why it often happens all at once, requires a deeper understanding of identity itself. And that's where we go next. Once the signal stabilizes in the body, something larger comes into play, not psychologically, but structurally, because the field reality operates within does not respond to isolated moments or passing states. It responds to patterns that hold. What it recognizes is not effort, but persistence, not emotion, but consistency. And the name for that consistency is identity. Identity is not who you think you are, it's who you return to when nothing is prompting you. It's the internal position that remains when the mind stops managing, the body stops bracing, and attention rests without demand. That position is not abstract. It behaves like a standing wave, a stable frequency that holds its shape over time. In physics, a standing wave doesn't move through space. It organizes space around itself. Energy accumulates because the wave is coherent, not because it is loud. This is how identity functions in the field. When your internal posture becomes stable, reality doesn't need instruction. It arranges itself around the frequency you consistently occupy. This is why sporadic effort produces sporadic results. The field doesn't respond to moments of alignment, it responds to what remains aligned when effort drops away. Identity is the signal that persists when no one is watching, including you. You may recognize this now in the way your reactions have softened. Not because you're detached, but because you're no longer negotiating with every stimulus. The internal debate has quieted. You're not switching between hope and doubt as rapidly. That slowing isn't loss of intensity, it's consolidation. The wave is forming. Most people never allow this to happen. They collapse coherence the moment uncertainty appears. They revert to familiar identities, the striver, the fixer, the one who anticipates disappointment in order to stay ahead of it. These identities feel active, but they scatter the signal. The field receives contradiction, so it mirrors inconsistency. What you're experiencing now is different. Something in you has stopped oscillating. You're not swinging between certainty and fear with the same momentum. The identity that used to manage outcomes is no longer dominant, and in its place, a quieter configuration is holding. This is where reality begins to pay attention. The observer effect is often misunderstood as thought influencing matter, but at a deeper level, it's identity influencing probability. What you repeatedly observe yourself as, calm or braced, open or guarded, settled or striving, determines which possibilities remain viable. The field doesn't respond to what you wish for. It responds to what your identity can sustain without collapse. And right now, your identity is becoming more stable. You can feel this stability not as excitement, but as reduced friction. Decisions don't require as much justification. Silence doesn't demand filling. You're less inclined to seek confirmation before trusting your internal sense of timing. This isn't confidence in outcome, it's confidence in orientation. And that distinction matters. A standing wave does not chase energy. Energy accumulates because the wave holds. In the same way, identity does not pursue response. Response gathers when identity stops shifting under pressure. This is why things often change suddenly after long periods of stillness. The field was not inactive, it was waiting for the wave to stop wobbling. You didn't force this stability. It emerged when effort became unsustainable, when pretending readiness felt heavier than honesty, when you stopped trying to be ahead of yourself. Those moments weren't setbacks, they were corrections. Each time you allowed yourself to remain present without forcing resolution, the wave strengthened. Reality responds to that strength. But this is also where many people misinterpret what's happening. They expect fireworks, clarity, or immediate reward. Instead, what comes first is neutrality, a sense that nothing is pulling you forward or back, that neutrality is not emptiness, it's balance. The wave has found its shape. From the field's perspective, this is the moment where response becomes efficient. No energy is wasted mirroring instability. No feedback is required to correct misalignment. The standing wave is readable, and readable signals are actionable. This is why identity matters more than desire. Desire fluctuates, identity holds, and once identity holds, probability reorganizes around it naturally, not because you've earned it, but because coherence allows it. You may notice now that you're less concerned with when things happen. Timing has loosened its grip. You're not checking as often. Not because you've given up, but because something in you knows the response no longer depends on vigilance. That knowing is not conceptual, it's structural. The wave is stable enough to trust. And this is the point where reality prepares to move. Not gradually, not incrementally, but decisively. Because once a standing wave is established, the field doesn't respond in pieces. It responds all at once. Why that happens, why reality waits, then mirrors suddenly, requires understanding what collapses when identity locks in. Reality does not respond gradually because coherence does not lock gradually. It holds, it wavers, it tests, and then it stabilizes. The moment it stabilizes, the response becomes inevitable. This is the part most people misunderstand. They believe something is building, accumulating, moving toward them step by step. But what actually happens is a quiet internal line is crossed, and from that moment on, the mirror has no choice but to rearrange. Up until that line, reality remains neutral, not indifferent, precise. It reflects back ambiguity because ambiguity is what's being broadcast. Mixed expectation, mixed readiness, mixed identity. But once that mixture resolves, once the internal posture stops negotiating, the field no longer delays. It shifts. And this is why so many people experience long stretches where nothing appears to change, followed by sudden movement that feels disproportionate to effort. The effort didn't cause the change, the release of effort allowed coherence to lock. And once it locks, probability collapses quickly. You can feel when this threshold is near because the internal conversation changes. You stop asking whether something will happen, not because you've decided it won't, but because the question itself no longer feels relevant. There's a strange absence of anticipation, a quiet certainty without narrative. That state is not hope, it's completion. Most people don't trust that feeling. They rush to re-engage effort, to reintroduce doubt, to stay psychologically active. They reopen the loop just as it's closing. But if you're here now, something in you allowed the loop to complete. You stayed present long enough for identity to settle without interference. That is the line. Once that line is crossed, you cannot go back to the previous way of showing up. You can pretend to, you can reenact the behaviors, but the internal posture is no longer available. The system won't generate the same urgency, the same tension, the same hunger for proof. And reality responds to that loss more strongly than it ever responded to striving. This is why the response feels sudden. From the outside, it looks like coincidence. From the inside, it feels like recognition. People, opportunities, and timing align not because you pulled them in, but because they now match the identity you've stabilized into. The field is no longer sorting conflicting signals. It's responding to a clear one. There's another reason this shift feels abrupt. The mind only notices external change. It doesn't register internal thresholds in real time. By the time the response appears, the decision has already been made by your nervous system, your identity, your baseline expectation of reality. The mind catches up afterward and calls it luck or timing. But you know better. You know something has already changed in how you stand inside yourself. You're not reaching forward anymore. You're not leaning into the future with tension. You're here. And that presence is not passive. It's magnetic because it's unfragmented. This is also why resistance doesn't show up as obstacles at this stage. It shows up as relevance falling away. Certain paths stop calling to you. Certain conversations lose energy. Certain options simply dissolve. That's not loss, it's selection. Reality is responding by removing what no longer matches. And here's the part that often goes unspoken. Once the response begins, it accelerates. Not because reality is rushing, but because the friction that slowed it has been removed. The standing wave holds. The field mirrors efficiently. The delay collapses. You may not see the full shape of the response yet, and you're not meant to. Clarity comes after alignment, not before. What you can notice is the absence of internal argument, the lack of urgency to interfere, the sense that whatever arrives will not require convincing or force. That's how you know the threshold has already been crossed. Reality doesn't test you after this point, it reflects you. And reflection is immediate when the image is stable. The moment you stop trying to make something happen, the field begins making something match. This is not manifestation, it's correspondence. And once correspondence begins, the old way of showing up, the one that strained, anticipated, negotiated, becomes unavailable. Not because you're enlightened, but because coherence has replaced effort. What collapses next is not the world, it's the identity that used to manage it. And when that collapses, something irreversible occurs. Because from here on, reality will no longer respond to who you were. It will only respond to who you are now. Once the threshold is crossed, something subtle but decisive happens. The old way of showing up doesn't fade gently. It loses structural support. The behaviors might still appear on the surface, but the internal energy that once powered them is gone. You can attempt to return to the familiar posture, to striving, pushing, rehearsing, explaining, but it feels hollow now, almost artificial. The system no longer believes in it. This is not growth as addition. It's growth as subtraction. What collapses first is the reflex to manage outcomes. You may notice that you can no longer summon the same urgency to fix, chase, or optimize. The part of you that once stayed mentally ahead of life, anticipating problems, preempting disappointment, controlling timing, no longer activates with the same force. Not because you decided to let go, but because the nervous system has stopped responding to those commands. Trying to force that posture now feels uncomfortable. It creates friction instead of momentum. The body resists. Attention drifts. The effort doesn't land. This is how you know something irreversible has occurred. When an identity collapses, it doesn't disappear. It becomes unusable. You might notice this in moments where you would normally over-explain yourself, but the words don't come, or where you would normally justify your direction, but the impulse to defend simply isn't there. Silence becomes easier than performance. Not because you're detached, but because the signal no longer needs amplification. Another collapse happens around waiting. The old version of you knew how to wait tensely, scanning for signs, tracking progress, measuring distance between now and later. That form of waiting is no longer available. When you try to inhabit it, it feels restless, almost dishonest. The system doesn't recognize it as necessary anymore. This is where many people panic. They mistake the loss of old behaviors for loss of agency. They think they're becoming passive or unmotivated. But what's actually happening is a reorganization of authority. Action no longer originates from pressure, it originates from clarity. And until clarity arrives, stillness holds. The collapse also shows up emotionally. You may find it harder to generate certain emotional reactions that once felt automatic. The sharpness of disappointment dulls, the urgency of excitement softens, even anxiety struggles to sustain itself. This doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means the system is no longer feeding emotion with narrative. Emotion without narrative passes quickly. What's important to understand is that this collapse is not something you control. You cannot reverse it by thinking differently. The identity that once needed tension to function has already dissolved, and once dissolved, it cannot be reassembled without contradiction. Reality will not respond to an identity that no longer coheres internally. This is why advice stops working at this stage. Techniques that once helped you motivate yourself now feel irrelevant. External validation doesn't land the same way. Even spiritual concepts can feel strangely flat, not because they're wrong, but because they're pointing to something you've already crossed. You may also notice a new intolerance for misalignment. Situations that require you to pretend, overextend, or distort your truth feel heavier than before. The body responds with fatigue or disengagement. This isn't avoidance, it's signal protection. The system is guarding coherence. And here's the key insight of this movement. Once coherence is protected, the old identity cannot survive. You can't go back to wanting in the same way. You can't pursue from lack without feeling the internal contradiction. You can't show up half-committed without the body withdrawing energy. The system simply won't support those positions anymore. This is the point of no return. Not because you've achieved something, but because something has ended. Reality responds not just to what stabilizes, but to what collapses. When old signals stop broadcasting, the field stops responding to them. And when that happens, paths that once seemed available quietly close, not as punishment, but as alignment. You may already feel this. Certain outcomes no longer appeal to you, even if they once did. Certain futures feel incompatible, even if they once felt exciting. This is not loss of imagination, it's refinement of identity. The wave has narrowed, the signal has become precise. What replaces the old posture is not effortlessness, it's inevitability. You no longer need to convince yourself that something is coming. You no longer need to posture readiness. You no longer need to prepare for disappointment in advance. Those strategies belong to a version of you that is no longer generating the signal. And once that version collapses, reality stops responding to its language entirely. This is why the response that comes next doesn't feel earned or chased. It feels matched. It arrives without requiring the old behaviors, because those behaviors are no longer relevant. The mirror doesn't look for them anymore. What happens now is not about internal work. It's about external rearrangement. Because when the old way of showing up becomes unavailable, reality has only one option left. It must respond to who remains. Once the old way of showing up has collapsed, reality no longer needs time. It doesn't need negotiation, reinforcement, or confirmation. The mirror has a stable image now, and when the image is stable, the response is immediate, not always dramatic, but unmistakably precise. This is where things begin to reorganize around you instead of in front of you. People respond differently without knowing why. Timing shifts without effort. Invitations appear without pursuit, not as rewards but as reflections. Reality isn't changing its behavior. It's matching a signal that no longer fluctuates. You may notice this first as ease, not excitement, not certainty. Just a sense that you no longer have to position yourself. Conversations don't require strategy. Decisions don't demand justification. You're not trying to be seen correctly. You're simply present. And presence removes distortion from the mirror. This is how response actually looks. It's subtle at first because it doesn't arrive with resistance. There's no struggle to overcome, no obstacle to conquer. Things align quietly, efficiently, as if they were already waiting for you to stop interfering. The world doesn't announce this moment, it simply meets you where you now stand. What's important here is recognition, not interpretation, not meaning-making, recognition. Because if you try to explain this phase too quickly, you reintroduce the old posture, the one that narrates instead of inhabits. Reality responds best when it's allowed to complete the movement without commentary. You'll know the response is underway when you stop feeling the need to anticipate it. There's a calm neutrality that settles in, not detachment, availability. You're open without leaning, ready without rehearsing. The mirror has turned, and now it's reflecting without delay. This is not manifestation, it's correspondence. The external world is simply agreeing with the internal position you now hold effortlessly. And this is the moment to acknowledge what has shifted. Right now, as you hear this, something in you is already aware that you are not the same as when you began listening, not dramatically different, not transformed in story, but structurally altered. The old urgency is gone, the old signal has collapsed, and the version of you that remains is coherent enough to be mirrored clearly. This is the activation threshold. You can feel it as a quiet confirmation, not emotional, but grounded, a sense that something has locked in place, that you no longer need to search for alignment because you're standing inside it. That recognition is not something to rush past, it's something to anchor, because identity stabilizes faster when it is named. The version of you who has reached this point is no longer negotiating with reality. You're no longer asking it to respond to effort, intention, or desire. You are allowing it to respond to presence. And that distinction marks a real threshold, one that does not reverse easily. This is why anchoring matters. When you name a shift, you allow it to hold. When you declare it, you stop wavering. And when coherence holds, the field responds with clarity. So if this moment resonates, if you can feel the quiet confirmation beneath the words, write this in the comments to anchor the shift. I show up fully and reality responds without resistance. Only write it if it feels true. Not as an affirmation, not as a wish, but as recognition. This is not for me, it's not for the algorithm. It's for your own system and for the field that mirrors what is stabilized. And if you choose not to write it, that's fine too. Coherence doesn't require performance. It only requires honesty. Now let this settle. Notice how little effort is required to stay here. Notice how the body doesn't brace, how the mind doesn't rush ahead, how the signal feels clean without being forced. This is the state reality responds to, not because you demand it, but because you finally allow yourself to remain. Reality was never waiting for you to want more. It was waiting for you to arrive. And now that you have, the mirror has already begun to move.